Welcome to Dante's Lonza, a dissection of the wildcat in Canto 1 of the Inferno in 3 parts. Its etymology, zoology, and allegory. My name is Patricia Vasquez. I'm an English professor from the College of Southern Nevada, and this is my video that accompanies the article I submitted to the Biblioteca Dantesca. At the opening of the Inferno, we find Dante climbing up the mountain of salvation, only to have it blocked by 3 animals that are generally thought to represent the 3 major sins dividing hell: incontinence, violence, and fraud. The first of the 3 beasts is some sort of a wildcat that springs up where the slope starts. Una lonza leggera y presta molto, che di pel maculato era coperta. This ferocious beast tries to force Dante back by leaping in front of him at every turn. Dante, though, remains optimistic and continues his ascent until the roar of a lion stops him in his tracks. Though the lion gives him pause, it isn't until the she-wolf trots into view that Dante loses all hope and takes flight, at which point the ghostly shade of Virgil materializes to guide our pilgrim along another path by which he might reach the doors of St. Peter. Given how many illustrations there are of a leopard stalking Dante, it's not entirely surprising to find that every single English translation of the Inferno translates the Lonza as a leopard, which belies a genuine controversy. To start, there isn't a straightforward correlation between the English word leopard and the Italian term that Dante uses, una lonza. A quick study of the etymology only adds to the mystery by leading us to the lynx, whose most striking features are the tufts of black hair on the tips of its ears and its bobbed tail. And yet many have argued, as Gervais Rosser does, that this is the animal that Dante had in mind, touting an impressive array of authorities such as Isidore of Seville and Albert Magnus. However, as Giuseppe Leda points out, no single bestiary or encyclopedia attributes to the lynx the swiftness and agility that are the 2 main characteristics of Dante's Lonza. Terry Bouquet explains that the difficulty in identifying exotic animals is that medieval authors themselves had difficulty understanding certain zoonyms inherited from antiquity, especially in the absence of direct specimens. To muddle matters further, Lonza was used for any wildcat during the Middle Ages, not just a lynx, but a serval, a panther, or a leopard. Given that the etymology proved fruitless, the most obvious step forward would be to see what could be gleaned from Charles S. Singleton's footnote on the Lonza. However, rather than settling the matter, Singleton's footnote proved to be a sort of Pandora's box. There was evidently little consensus about its gender, whether the Lonza was a real animal or possibly a hybrid like a mule, or perhaps a mythical creature like a dragon. Some asserted that the Lonza was an offspring of a male lion and a female leopard. Others claimed the Lonza indicates the leopard was a female, i.e., a leopardess, while a third group believes the Lonza was mere fiction, one of those imaginary beasts seen roaming only between the covers of medieval bestiaries. Giuseppe Leda falls into this third camp. After an extensive examination of the 3 beasts, Leda concludes that the Lonza is neither lynx nor leopard, nor a panther, but a pardus, one of those fantastic beasts of the Middle Ages. And to back up his claim, Leda cites Dante's teacher, Brunetto Latini, who uses pardus for Lonza when translating his Tesoro from French to Italian. While the Latin pardus, from the Greek pardos, specifically refers to a male panther, the Sanskrit, that is the source for both, is an ambiguous term that can mean either a panther or a tiger or a leopard. In any case, the proverbial expression about a leopard not being able to change his spots in Jeremiah 13:23 is closer to what Leda thinks Dante had in mind. That is, a figure that could be invested with moral meaning. Of the living, breathing contenders that other scholars have proposed over the centuries, the list includes a puma, a panther, a lynx, a leopardess, a cheetah, a hyena, and even a lioness. Whereas English translations uniformly adopted the leopard, French and German translations are more inclined to use panther, though in essence they're saying the same thing, since a panther is a leopard whose rosettes are difficult to see because its fur is black. The problem with the leopard, Pantera pardus, is that the two adjectives Dante uses to describe the Lonza, light and very swift, don't match the leopard any more than they match the lynx. What sets the leopard apart from other big cats is that it's built for climbing. Using its muscular hind legs, the leopard drags its prey up trees to stash them away from scavengers. One might also ask why Dante didn't simply write Il Leopardo, if that's the animal he wanted to call to mind. Gloria Allaire points out that medieval Italians knew what leopards were, citing chronicles from Italian explorers in North Africa. In one anecdote, Andrea de Barberino asks his guide what a leondre is, and is told that it's a cross between a male lion and a female leopard. Uno león et da una leoparda femmina. While controversies surrounding Dante's work are many, the identification of the Lonza shouldn't be one of them. The animal Dante had in mind when he used the term Lonza was without question the cheetah. Light, very swift, and spotted. Even Rosser, who had held that the Lonza was a lynx, acknowledged that artists of the early illustrated manuscripts of the Divine Comedy were divided, some showing a spotted creature similar to a cheetah, others a distinctly dog-like animal. Ironically, the leopard that's been posing as a symbol of fraud for centuries turns out to be a fraud hiding in plain sight. The reason for the mix-up is that there's a long history of confusing the pair. While both have spots for camouflage that would make them ideally suited as symbols of fraud, leopards are weighed down by their heavy, muscular frames, whereas cheetahs have lightweight bodies built for speed. And speed is a characteristic that Dante attaches to fraud by likening Geryone's flight to that of a high-velocity falcon. A case that illustrates the zoological confusion between the leopard and the cheetah is seen in Titian's painting of Bacchus and Ariadne, which depicts two cheetahs pulling Bacchus's chariot. The cheetahs had been historically misidentified as leopards, a point which Warren Tressiter felt compelled to clarify as recently as 1980. Cheetahs, he explained, although rare, were in fact better known in Italy in Titian's time than any other variety of exotic, spotted, carnivorous feline. As a matter of fact, Tressiter uses an illuminated manuscript of the Inferno from the early 1400s to support his claim that Italians were familiar with cheetahs. The most accurate drawing of a cheetah, made by an Italian artist before Titian, Tressiter tells us, is one attributed to Pisanello, 1395 to 1455. Thomas T. Allen draws our attention to the exact same drawing to point out how the cheetah was sporting a working rather than a decorative collar around its neck. This animal, obviously, is someone's pet, and probably a hunting partner as well. The working collar worn by the cheetah hints at yet another fashion of how hunting with cheetahs had taken Europe by storm more or less about the time Dante was born. Paolo Trovato points out that the use of a leash can only refer to a cheetah. Medieval iconography confirms that cheetahs, unlike leopards, often wore collars with leashes. The practice of hunting with cheetahs, despite its long history in the East, took a while to catch on in Europe. Credit for introducing it is given to Frederick II, who appears in Canto 10 of the Inferno among the heretics. Marco Massetti suggests that the famed falconer and naturalist who ruled the Holy Roman Empire from Sicily likely learnt the practice of hunting with them from Sicilian Arabs. The primary reason it's been so hard to identify the Lonza is that the cheetah was referred to as a leopard. When, for instance, Frederick sends a menagerie of animals to Ravenna in 1231, Leopards are listed, but it isn't until we learn that he used coursing leopards that we can be certain he was using cheetahs as hunting companions. Why? Because coursing is its own unique kind of hunting. Greyhounds are typically associated with coursing because they rely on their eyesight rather than their sense of smell to locate their prey, and then apply their speed to catch it. Cheetahs, not leopards, have a long history of being used for coursing. If you were beginning to suspect that any mention of a leopard referred to a cheetah, the Encyclopedia Britannica removes all doubt. The name leopard was originally given to the cat now called the cheetah, the so-called hunting leopard. Mazzetti relates how in medieval Europe this felid was widely used in hunting, and it was known in Italy as bardo di caccia. Those in charge of its rearing and training were called barderi. Trovato, who concurs that the cheetah is the animal that frightens Dante at the beginning of the Inferno, informs us that Dante most likely saw one as a youth, as he tells us that the city of Florence bought a leopardas for 50 florins in 1290. The modern Italian term for the cheetah, il ghepardo, wasn't, oddly enough, coined until after the craze of hunting with them was over. And of the 5 subspecies of cheetahs, zoologist Giovanni Bellani argues that Dante's Lonza was specifically the Asiatic cheetah, Acinonyx jubatus fanaticus. Long before Dante was born, Bellani informs us, the cheetah, the friendliest of the big cats, had been trained for hunting in India and in Persia, throughout the Middle East, easily chasing down the most agile prey, like hares or gazelles, being the fastest land animal. Even Marco Polo witnessed and reported that Kublai Khan hunted with cheetahs in 1298. The cheetah may not roar like a lion, it purrs, or climb trees like the elusive leopard, but it can reach race car speeds in seconds to take down its prey. Its genus, Acinonyx, is Greek for claws that can't retract, while its species name, jubatus, is Latin for the slight mane on its nape, which may explain why it's so often thought to be a hybrid between a lion and a leopard. One source that Trovato unearthed made such claim. According to the book of the Nature of Animals, it arises from the mating of a lion and a leopard, or a leopardess and a lioness. This idea that the cheetah is a hybrid reminds us of that anecdote by the Italian explorer who was asking about the Leondra and how he was told it was part lion and part leopard. De Grassi's sketchbook vanishes any doubt, for he scribbled Leopardo beneath his drawing of a cheetah wearing a collar. Another way Italians may have caught a glimpse of a cheetah is as pilgrims on their way to the Holy Land. Bouquet reports that 13th century pilgrims on the island of Cyprus describe royal hunts with falcons, dogs, and domestici leopardi. Visits to the Holy Land may explain why Charles of Anjou, who appears in Canto 7 of Purgatory, ordered 8 cheetahs to be captured, accompanied by their handlers, on April 12th, 1273. What is clear, Massetti explains, is that soon after, cheetahs began to appear everywhere in northern Italian courts. In short, a medieval Italian would have been familiar with a cheetah because nobles loved the spectacle of hunting with them. Only they called them hunting leopards. How this was done bears a striking resemblance to falconry. These monarchs went out to hunt with a tethered, hooded cheetah on a pillion behind their saddles. When game was started, the cat was loosed, and after it had downed its prey, it was quickly rewarded with blood and flesh, and thus lured back to its perch. Notice the Medici mural featuring the Duke of Lucca, with the cheetah that sits behind him, still, by the way, misidentified as a leopard, even though he chose this animal as the symbol for his house. We can now see that everywhere a leopard was depicted, a cheetah belonged there. But aside from reducing the error bar, how does properly recognizing the Lonza as the cheetah improve our understanding of Dante's Inferno? One might be inclined to politely demur that leopards and cheetahs are both big cats who make haste of taking down their prey. However, the persistent misidentification of the Lonza profoundly misrepresents Dante by obscuring the symmetries he had developed between the cheetah, the greyhound, and the wolf, which subsequently left its allegory of fraud in doubt. While there's a universal consensus that these animals mean something, what they mean is entirely open to debate. No one's even sure which moral failings the animals allude to. Some insist that the she-wolf represents avarice, the lion pride, and that the leopard is luxuria, extravagance, later lust. Others hold the beasts represent the three major divisions of hell. Within that context, what does the Lonza represent? Some of the most prominent Dantists are at odds. Teodolinda Barolini aligns the Lonza with lust, while Giuseppe Leda says it should be the other way around. So which is it, lust or fraud? The lion alone is uncontroversially identified with the sin of violence. In his introduction to the Inferno, Mark Musa says that by bringing up the Lonza at the very moment Dante enters the eighth circle, he's signaling that the Lonza corresponds to fraud. In Canto 16, we see Virgil asking Dante to give him the cord he has fastened around his waist. And Dante says that I had thought I might be able to catch the leopard with the gaudy skin earlier. Musa says the mention of the leopard here, just when the pilgrim is about to enter the third and final division in hell, is certainly indication that, of the three beasts on the mountainside, it is the leopard that we must associate with the sins of fraud, for such sins are punished here. The cord that Dante refashions as a harness for Geryon is connected to the Lonza, as he tells us he was considering using it to leash the wildcat the day before, reminding us of the leashed cheetahs we saw in those sketchbooks drawn by medieval Italian artists. Another detail that deserves our attention is the Lonza's spotted skin, which Dante refers to as pel di pinta. While Musa translated this as gaudy in his introduction above, to better grasp what moral failing that wildcat embodies, keep the painted skin pasted in your cognitive blackboard. And here's why. Leda points out that the only other animal Dante describes as having this painted spotted skin is Geryon, the filthy image of fraud from Canto 17. His back and his breasts and both sides were painted with knots and little wheels. The paws of the chimeric Geryon are almost certainly those of a cheetah, spreading out his arms and doubling up his legs as Geryon does in Inferno 16, much like the Sphinx in Egypt conceals its chimeric nature beneath a sea of sand. With Virgil and Dante riding on his back, Geryon soars downwards, below, into the Malebolge in Canto 17, in a flight Dante likens to a falcon, reminding us that cheetahs, like falcons, were trained to hunt in partnership, unlike the wolf or the lion. These, then, are the three animals Dante wanted us to picture. The top two are wild savages, because their crimes are mindlessly done, driven as they are by appetite or passion. In contrast, the iconographic symbol of fraud is the cheetah, for the given reasons that it is both camouflaged and lightning quick. But there's another key feature that's been woefully overlooked. What differentiates fraud and makes it the worst of all sins is the use of the mind in the crime, a point that Virgil, as Dante's mouthpiece, belabors in Canto 11. Since fraud belongs exclusively to man, God hates it more. By restoring the cheetah as a symbol of fraud, we see how it differs from wild savages, for its cooperation with humans has been intelligently engineered to produce a trained predator. Also relevant is how the cheetah has been repeatedly compared by the Western observer to a greyhound. Even as recently as 1917, there was an attempt to classify the cheetah according to its physical resemblance to the greyhound, which is ironic because greyhounds are known as canine cheetahs. Such a comparison brings us back to Canto 1 and the animal that's supposed to drive the she-wolf back to hell, the swift-footed greyhound. By correctly identifying the Lonza as the cheetah, we can now see the symmetry we were robbed of before between the cheetah and the greyhound. The cheetah is the pinnacle of vice, while the greyhound is the pinnacle of virtue. Aside from honoring his patron, Can Grande, Dante likely chose the dog to represent virtue as an allusion to Plato's Republic, where Socrates describes the soul as the shepherd of our appetites, that must be trained like dogs to heel, or they revert to their savage natures and become wolves, which is a second symmetry worth noting. One might ask why Dante chose only one beast to represent virtue and 3 to represent vice. Here again, philosophy comes to the rescue. In Ethics, Aristotle explains, there are many ways to be in error, for badness is proper to the indeterminate, but there is only one way to be correct. Another philosopher that Dante may have turned to in order to narrow down his choice of beasts was Epictetus. In the Discourses, Epictetus laments that most people abandon good reason and judgment to chase bodily appetites, sinking, as he says, to the level of wolves, faithless, vicious, and treacherous. Others turn to lions, wild savages, and uncivilized. But most become like foxes, the sorriest of the lot. For what else is a spiteful, malicious man except a fox, or something even lower and less dignified? Traces of the fox as a symbol for fraud may be gleaned from Guido Montefeltro's confession in Circle 8, this fraudulent counselor whose speech slithers with S's to mimic the sound of the hissing sound of the flames that engulf him, confides to Dante that his many shenanigans were less the work of a lion and more of a fox. Ultimately, Dante chooses to be innovative, as he did when he replaced Charon with Phlegyas to ferry the souls across the river Styx, and adopts the cheetah rather than the fox as a symbol for fraud. And I submit that Dante chose the cheetah because of how Statius uses them in the Thebaid. The patron god of Thebes is Bacchus, who appears in Book 4 in his vine-hung chariot, driven not by horses but by tigers, who licked harness damp with wine. The harness is the first indication that these tigers are cheetahs, but more clues emerge a few verses down. When, for example, Bacchus gives the signal, we're told his yoked Hyrcanians' hackles rose. No sooner than done, he reached the fields. Aside from underscoring the swiftness with which these harnessed tigers transport the god to the Nemean plain, Statius depicts the hackles rising, which calls to mind the cheetah's crested nape. And then he gives us a geographical location, Hyrcanian, a region in modern-day Iran that links these tigers to the last place cheetahs remain wild to this day. The cheetah is thus inextricably linked to Bacchus, who, as the god of wine and revelry, stands in direct contrast to the sun god Apollo, who champions reason and order. In addition to the connotations of chaos and disorder that Bacchus imparts on the cheetah, Statius uses them to signal treachery. We see the cheetahs reappear in Book 7 when Jocasta uses the breast card in an attempt to stop the fratricide between her and Oedipus's son. Ediocles and Polynices. As she pleads her case to Polynices, who has arrived with allies, the 7 against Thebes, the Furies take this opportunity to spark conflict by exploiting a pair of tigresses tame and trained to the yoke, which lately had been seen sauntering along Dirce's stream. Aside from the yoke, we're told the wildcats have handlers, Bacchus's entourage, and an elder priest, and that they appear to have been enjoying a well-earned rest for having been hitched to the war car that conquered the East, lately returned triumphant. That triumph is a scene we witnessed earlier in Titian's painting of Bacchus and Ariadne. One might suspect that Titian was correcting the mistake that tigers pulled Bacchus's cart by painting in a pair of cheetahs instead. To be clear, it isn't the handlers who signal the cheetahs to attack. Instead, Statius places the blame squarely on Tisiphone for jolting back these unnaturally tame cats to their former furious state. They burst forth, turned into something the fields knew not, as if 2 bolts of lightning had burst at once from a distant point in the sky, hurtling, blazing a long trail through the clouds, with a course no less rapid. With monstrous roaring, the 2 bound over the plains, and in one stupendous spring mauled your charioteer, Amphiaraus. The preemptive strike that ushers in the charioteer's pitiful end foreshadows the tragic death of Amphiaraus, the heroic rider whom he serves. Statius hints at this by adding, not a good omen. In retaliation, the Argive army kills the cheetahs, effectively kicking off the first day of battle. That the cheetahs came so close to bringing down the Argives' greatest champion at the very moment Jocasta was negotiating a truce must have struck Dante as a classic illustration of treachery. This literary allusion that associates the cheetah with Bacchus, and specifically with treachery and Statius the Bad, made the cheetah ideally suited as a symbol for fraud. The other more obvious reasons for selecting the cheetah are without question the lightning speed it uses to attack its prey and its spotted hide for camouflage. Less obvious, but more significant, is the intelligence required to engineer its cooperation. The wild savage that nature had intended by means of the intellect is transformed into a trained predator, which is at once far more menacing and more appropriate for the crimes committed in the circle of fraud. Epilogue. The Asiatic cheetah that once played a starring role in the royal menageries of the Middle Ages and which had roamed from India to Russia is today critically endangered. The International Society for Endangered Cats reports that only about 70 to 110 remain in the wild, living in Iran in a remote and arid plateau. Bouquet says the practice of hunting with cheetahs fell out of fashion by the 17th century. The expense of keeping cheetahs may have played a part. In addition to the food, a ruler had to have a specialized handler on the payroll. Or it could have ceased to be a novelty. The savagery of the spectacle could have become distasteful. Whatever the reason, it appears that from the 17th century onwards, rulers preferred larger animals such as tigers and panthers to be displayed in cages, giving an image of tamed ferocity.